I'll start by answering a question that was asked this morning about states of becoming at work, in your job. It's not just in your head. You've actually created this state of becoming by taking on the job. And the question you have to ask yourself is, what do I want out of the job, aside from the money? And part of it is you want recognition, you want a fair treatment, you want what you want out of the other people. You could also ask yourself, what perfections am I developing in this job? Am I developing equanimity? Am I developing perseverance, determination? And so that's what's going to determine whether you're going to be able to survive the job and keep your well-being or mental well-being intact. Because if it depends on other people recognizing you, you're going to become more and more subservient to them. You have to figure out, what do I really want out of this job? And if you're going for it for the perfections, then you're much more likely to be able to survive the job well. Now you may decide, okay, the job is really miserable, they're not treating me right, this is not a place to develop perfection and persistence, it's stupid. In which case you may want to change the job if you can. But there's sometimes when you've got a job and you can't get out. You say, well, in this case, I have to look at it from the point of view of the perfections. What good qualities of heart can I develop as I'm doing this job? And that will change the job. So in some cases, the becomings are not totally mental. They're actually part of the real world. And you've got to learn how to try to make it as good a becoming as possible. It's going to be defined by your desire, what you want out of it. So you have to be very reflective on what you're actually there for, what's your purpose in the job. See if that makes a difference. Is your job miserable, man?
I like the client side of things, but it was in the context I recently went for a promotion, and I didn't actually really like that aspect of things. I made a decision to go back to my original position, which, it was more focused on the client relationship, which I preferred, rather than the managerial side of things.
That's what you'll often find, is a lot of the reasons they're paying you more for the managerial jobs is because they're more miserable. So you have to ask yourself, do I want the money that much?
Yeah. But it was, should I use this?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Does this work?
What happens if you turn that off? It's creating the static.
The consideration is taking on a managerial position. The question I was asking, does it lead to more qualities on the path that are useful? But I didn't think so in the end. But I'm just interested in your thoughts on that.
It's really going to depend on the job. In some cases you take on the managerial position and actually you find you have less time for the practice, you have less energy for the practice, in which case it's not worth it.
Yeah. I found it very consuming. Yeah. So ideally, what are the motivations or perfections that you want to desire or drive you in the job?
Okay, well, you ask yourself, which perfections am I lacking in? All of them, okay. Okay, then you have free choice, okay, which ones do I want to develop? And sometimes the job will force you, okay, I've got to learn lots of equanimity here. And some discernment. The Buddha talks about the things you have to accept in life, and there's so much said about, Buddhism teaches acceptance, acceptance, acceptance. And you look in the canon, and the Buddha doesn't talk about acceptance that much. I mean, aside from accepting invitations, he talks about accepting the fact that there are going to be people saying unpleasant things, accepting the fact that there will be pain in this life, accepting the fact that when someone has died, you accept the fact that they've died. You don't go into denial. There's a story about that I like. And then there's finally accepting when you've done something wrong in the past, you accept the fact, okay, I did that wrong in the past, I've got to learn from it. But in each case, the Buddha doesn't have you just sit there and accept. He says there are ways of using your discernment so you don't have to suffer from these things. With harsh words or unpleasant words, you realize, okay, I can remind myself, one, this is the nature of human speech. There's a passage where the Buddha said, when people criticize you, they'll either criticize you meaning well or not meaning well, out of kindness or not out of kindness, saying things that are true, saying things that are untrue, saying things that are actually useful to know or not useful to know. And so when you get something that's untrue, useless, ill-meaning, unkind, it's not out of the ordinary. It's not that outrageous that you're being subjected to this. I mean, the Buddha himself was subjected to this kind of speech. So you just remind yourself, okay, this is part of the human world. I was the one who bought into the human world to begin with. Ajahn Fuang had a student she complained that she was always a victim of gossip at her work. And one day she went to meditate with him during her lunch break. And she had this vision of herself in a hall of mirrors, just going back in this direction, back in this direction. And she said to herself, you know, I've probably been the victim of gossip for many, many lifetimes, not just this one. And that got even more depressed. And so she went to see Ajahn Fuang and to tell him about this, hoping that he would comfort her. He said, well, you're the one who wanted to get born. And in Thai he said it pretty strongly, Masurik Makurt. Are there any Thai people in here? Surak, Manakna. It's every word. And it's kind of struck her, but he's basically saying, you were the one who wanted to be born. This is what human in the world is like. You bought into this. I mean, when I was in Thailand, when people would insult me, I kept reminding myself, if I hadn't learned Thai, I wouldn't know what they're saying. It's my fault that I know what they're saying. And that made it easier to deal with. The other thing they had to reflect on, the fact is that when someone says something, the sound makes contact at your ear and then it stops. And you remind yourself, and you just let it stop there, okay? An unpleasant sound has made contact at the ear and now it's stopped. If there's anything that goes beyond that, I'm the one who's digging it up and making it reverberate through my mind. I don't have to. To whatever extent I'm suffering from that, I'm bringing it on myself. So I don't have to do that. That's harsh words. Physical pain. It's interesting, the Buddha talks a lot about being equanimous and enduring physical pain. He doesn't give you too many tips on how to do that. For that you have to go to people like the forest Ajahns, like Ajahn Lee and Ajahn Mahabua. Ajahn Lee talks about how, when there's pain, say pain in your knee, focus on other parts of the body first to make them comfortable through your breathing. And then from there, think of that good breath energy going through the pain. And so that you're, instead of just being on the receiving end of the pain, you're actually more proactive. And you get more proactive, then you actually go into the pain and start looking at, what is this sensation of pain that I'm so afraid of? And you find that when you're not running away from it, it's not as fearsome as it would be if you were running away from it. Like you're asking, so is the physical pain, is it the same thing as my sensation of the body? Well, no. The pain is one thing, the body sensations are earth, water, wind, fire. There's something different. You've got to ask yourself, where's the sharpest point of the pain? You begin to realize it moves around a lot. Or one of the perceptions I like using is that instead of thinking of the pain as coming at you, think of it going away. As soon as you sense it, it's going away, going away, going away. I learned that technique one time when I was in Singapore. Tankang took me to see a Chinese doctor who was going to treat my back. He had me lie down, face down, And first he started rubbing oil on my back, and it felt good. And then he started rubbing harder and harder and harder. So it was getting kind of raw. And then he pulled out these bamboo whisks and started beating me. And my first thought was, oh my gosh, what karma have I done? That I deserve this. I said, well, part of being a Westerner in Asia is there's an Asian belief that Westerners are weak. So I said, I'm not going to be weak. I'm going to stand this. And then I said, well, I can't do just that. And then I got this perception. Wait a minute, the pain is going away. Each time I sense it, it's going away. It's kind of like sitting in an old station wagon with the seat faces back, and you're coming down the road. And as soon as anything gets into your range of vision, it's going away. And so you see it that way, it's a lot easier to deal with. So there are ways you can deal with the pain so you don't have to suffer from it. As for admitting when someone has died, there's a great story in the I think it's the Jatakas or the commentary, where a king's favorite queen has died, and he doesn't accept the fact that she's dead. So he just keeps the body around, hoping that she's going to come back. And the people in the palace, of course, don't like this, having a corpse in the palace. And so they find a monk who's psychic and ask him if he can trace down where she is now. Turns out she's been reborn as a worm. And so he gets the worm and brings it into the palace. And actually, through him, the worm starts speaking. And he asks the worm, are you happy as a worm? Yes, I'm very happy here. I've got a really cool husband. Do you miss your old husband? No, I don't miss him anymore. I've got this really good hunk of a worm, you know. And so the king hears that, he's okay, take the body out. And then finally, when you realize you've done something bad in the past, the Buddha says, remorse is not going to undo what you've done. You accept the fact that it was a mistake, and you make up your mind you're not going to repeat that mistake. And then you spread lots of goodwill. Goodwill for yourself, goodwill for the person you wronged, goodwill for everybody, as a way of helping to strengthen the mind so that it doesn't, one, get worn down by its mistakes, and then two, remind yourself, okay, I don't want to harm anybody again. So that's what you accept, but you don't just accept. You learn how to deal with things that you have to accept in a way that you don't suffer from them. Any other questions?
I was wondering how you would rank, or how would you navigate responsibilities you have to people who are not your mother and father, and how you would order those responsibilities if some of them are mutually exclusive.
Can you be a little more specific?
Sure. Like say you make a promise to one person, and then like you have somebody else who might need something from you, but that promise is kind of maybe getting in the way, right?
Mm-hmm.
You could tell the first person, I'm sorry, I can't do this. But like in scenarios where things are somewhat mutually exclusive, how do you navigate the situations?
Well, usually it's a case of first come, first serve.
Right.
Yeah. You make a promise to X, and then Y comes along with a problem. You said, look, I've already promised X that I would help him or her. And then see what you can do within the confines of that original promise. As a general rule. Now, there will be exceptions. When the other person comes along, it's a much more severe problem, in which case you might talk to X and say, look, I've got this other problem that's come up. We need to negotiate.
Does how well you know the person factor into this?
Not necessarily. Because sometimes say the second person comes along and it's a much more dire kind of thing. I mean, they're dying or something, if they don't get your help. In which case you talk to the first person and say, look, this other person is really in need.
you were speaking about, when somebody says something that you don't like, just kind of think the sound just comes at the ears. What I have difficulty with is when people say things that tend to have kind of negative consequences for me kind of down the line. So it's not so much that they're disparaging me and I'm feeling hurt by that, although there's maybe an element to that. It's more the fact that when they say something, say it creates a perception that then, causes other people to behave in different ways. That might make my life difficult. In such a scenario, like if I've tried practicing acceptance, but then you just kind of feel like you get pushed into a corner because like a lot of your options get shut off because you don't do anything. So how do you navigate something like that?
This is when you have to be very, very careful about how you deal with that. How many people can you talk to convince that what the first person said is not true? And there's also that case sometimes if you go around saying, I said this about me, but it's really not true. And they'll believe, it must be true, otherwise you wouldn't be trying to patch things up. So it's one of those cases where it depends a lot on the individuals.
So, as a general principle, you wouldn't practice acceptance necessarily?
It's not necessary, no. All I noticed like in the case with the John Fung, he was, when he first went to Wat Samphanthawong, he told me, this was just when the place was just getting off the ground. He went there and he had this vision that he was in a tiger's mouth, but he had a little amulet that protected him. And it turned out that the people in the neighborhood were not all that positive about having a forest monastery. They were more used to monks who were not behaving properly, and then you can control monks who don't behave properly. And the incident came up, for a long time the monastery didn't have much money. Then Ajahn Fung started getting students in Bangkok, and some of them had this vision that if they didn't build a jetty at Wat Samphanthawong, he was going to die. So they got the money together, and there was quite a large donation that they made for a papa. And then all the neighbors started taking an interest. They came and they said, it's time to have a temple committee now to look after the money. And he said, why do we need a committee? We can just put the money in the bank. And so 2 days later they came back and they said, can we borrow the money? He said, no, this is Sangha funds, we can't borrow it. And so there were people who went out and started accusing him of all kinds of things. And for a while, very few people came to the monastery. In fact, that happened to be the time when I joined the monastery. And I got used to the fact that people didn't come into the monastery. I actually liked it. But as he said, sometimes when people hate you, it's convenient. When you go someplace, you don't have to ask permission. When you come back, you don't have to bring presents. And so he put up with the fact that his name was being smeared. And then the people who were kind of the ringleaders of that particular movement died in a horrible car crash. And people got very quiet. So that was a case where he just put up with it. Now there are other cases where there will be some people that you would want to talk to and say, look, this is not really true, what that person said about me. Again, play it by ear. Because we're not meant to be Buddhist doormats. John Fung had a student who was a seamstress, and when they found out that she would go to the monastery, they said, why do you charge so much for your clothing? I mean, you're going to the monastery, you should be frugal and live in a very simple life. And she knew that she was asking a fair price. And so she went to see Ajahn Fung and asked him how to respond. He said, tell them, look, I'm not going to a monastery to be stupid. So use your intelligence as to what you think would actually be productive ways of letting people know that what was said about you is false. But the first thing you've got to do is that when someone says something like that, is not get angry. See it just as kind of going past you, instead of taking it in. when I was with John Foon, as my meditation was getting better, I noticed I'd come down in the evening and he'd say some things really sharp to me. And at first I was disappointed. I said, here I'm trying to maintain my concentration, and he's saying that. And then I realized, he's actually testing my concentration. So I had to practice. Okay, he'll say things, and I just had to let it pass. And there's one time he had asked me to translate Ajahn Lee's book on frames of reference. And so the day came when I was done. And so that evening, when he was talking with another monk, I came up, bowed down, and told him that I'd finished the translation. And he said, well, that's your business, none of mine. And it was like the words just went right past, like this. And I thought to myself, well, that was pretty harsh, wasn't it? But it didn't go into me. And the monk who was with him was pleased that he had said something like that. And then the next thing he said, okay, in that case, we'll find a sponsor, print it. I guess I passed the test. Now, you'll have people saying things nasty to you, and they're not testing your concentration. But you have to learn to say, okay, I don't have to be a vacuum cleaner and sucking in all the dirt out of the air. If there's some dirt's coming past, just let it go past. I don't have to take it in. And then the next question is, okay, what do I do now? And it's a lot easier to think about, what am I going to do now, when you're not upset. There's a question here.
Ajahn, I was just wondering, what are the qualities of a good monastic?
Qualities of a good monastic. Virtue, concentration, discernment. Modesty. Contentment. Being reclusive, in other words, you're not seeking company a lot. And then the standard listing, being mindful, being persistent. Develop your concentration, develop your discernment. It's a list. It comes in a sutta where Anuruddha has been thinking about, well, what kind of people deserve this Dharma? And it's always a useful thing to ask yourself, do I deserve to hear the Dharma? Am I the kind of person that the Dharma is aimed at? And I like the one about being reclusive. He says, as a monk, you can't just drive people away. If they come to you and they have a Dharma question, you answer it. But he says you answer it just enough so that they will go away. In other words, satisfied with the answer. You're not there to kind of draw them in and develop kind of a relationship more than answering the questions about the Dharma.
Ajahn, thank you for your advice about not just accepting, but actually reducing our suffering, sometimes through proactive means. So my question is, when we do that, I can observe this often expectation and craving of an outcome when actively thinking about doing something active, whether it's in meditation or outside of meditation. So what advice do you have in meditation when there's something occurring and we're doing something active with that doesn't agitate our meditation further, but actually further craving or expectation of meditation outcome, and outside of meditation say there's suffering occurring and we are thinking about ways of alleviating the suffering, but doing so without creating further suffering by expecting something along with it. I just find that oftentimes it's so closely attached, the thought of doing something automatically come with the volition of I want X, Y, and Z to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. And you have to live with the fact there will be some agitation. Now, what's usually useful when you're meditating is, if an issue has come up, tell yourself, okay, I will address this issue at the end of my meditation. But first let me get my mind quiet. Because if the mind is quiet, it's like sharpening your knives. And they're ready to cut through things. And if you start out the meditation with that topic, it'll take over the meditation. Tell yourself, okay, I've got this topic, I've got this issue, but first I've got to get the mind quiet. So if any time that during the meditation that thought comes up, say, not yet, not yet, not yet. Then at the end of the meditation, give yourself 5, 10, 15, however many minutes you need to think it through. Your mind will be sharper, be more ready. This is an important part of meditation is, say, okay, I've got the mind quiet, but now I've got to use it. And some people say, well, I'd rather be quiet. Well, there's work that has to be done. It's like someone comes in, you feed them because you want them to do some work. And they say, well, I'd rather just keep on feeding. There comes a point where you say, okay, I've got the mind quiet so that I can work. It will involve some agitation. It will involve some questioning. It will involve some desire. But it's for a purpose. And as long as you're clear about your purpose and clear about the problem, that's all part of the practice. When you look at the images that the Buddha gives of people who are good at the practice, you don't see anybody relaxing their way to nirvana. It's soldiers, it's people in battle, people trying to develop skills, people searching. Those are the images that illustrate this is how we're supposed to practice. So there are times you develop the calm, and then you have to use that as a basis for the work that has to be done. And desire is okay. It's okay to want a good outcome. But then you have to ask yourself, how do I get that good outcome? You see this in the Buddhist definition of suffering. One of the, you've chanted it probably many times. Yabichan nalapiti tambidukang, not getting what you want. Now some people hear that and say, well, I'll just learn how not to want, then there'll be no suffering. And the Buddha actually defines it another way. It's not getting what you want means having been born, not wanting to die. Being subject to illness, not getting illness, being subject to aging, not wanting to age, being subject to death, not wanting to die. Okay, just wanting that is going to be suffering. But again, wanting that was what motivated the Buddha to go out to begin with. He wanted to solve that problem. So the issue is not that you want it, the issue is, well, how are you going to go about it? And then, of course, we'll look at all the effort that he went through. But he actually solved the problem eventually. So there are these problems that are weighing us down, and if I just want it to go away, it's not going to go away. To yourself, like, I've got to learn about cause and effect, how to act so that I can get that result. This is why when the Buddha gives his shortest description of what he awakened to, it's a causal principle. When this is, that is. When this isn't, that isn't. From the arising of this comes the arising of that. From the cessation of this comes the cessation of that. And that's basically two causal principles. One is that as soon as A comes, B will come, and then when A goes away, B goes away. It's like when you stick your finger in a fire, it hurts immediately. You don't have to wait for the next lifetime. You take it out, okay, it stops burning. That's one kind of causal relationship. The second one is you plant a seed now. It's going to take a while for that seed to grow. Which means that at any given moment, you've got influences coming in from the past, but you also have the freedom to choose what you're going to do with those influences. That's an important principle. This ability to choose freely in the present moment, that's how we're going to find our freedom. So again, the problem is not that you want good results. The question is, how are you going to go about it? Any other questions?
I have a question about what you said in one of the answers before.
Mm-hmm.
You said we are the ones who wanted to be born.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean?
When you're dying, you say, whoops, I got to go someplace. I can't stay here any longer. And I'll just tell you one experience I had. I was electrocuted one time. And I was convinced I was going to die. And fortunately, the current stopped, and I didn't die. And the people who saw the incident said it was like that. It was just like a snap of a finger. For me, it was 5 minutes. And the realization, okay, this electric current is going through my body. I can't move. The body actually started crying. Well, not crying, but shouting. Out beyond my control. And I said, oh my gosh, I can't stay here any longer. Where am I going to go? First thought that went through my mind is, I was stupid, I didn't check the electricity before I touched this thing. Second thought was my father was going to be really upset, because I was only 35 at the time, I'm too young to die, and his big fear was I'm going to go to Asia, I'm going to get some weird illness, I'm going to die, and and this was going to come true. And then the third thought was, I can't think those thoughts, that I've got to get myself together, if I'm going to die, I've got to do this right. And it was like these different doors appeared in front of me, places where I could go. And then before I chose any one of them, the current stopped. So these choices will come at that point. And you have to ask, which door do I want to go into? And they're based on your past karma. So you want to choose a place where you can practice. Which may not be the prettiest place. You think about Thailand in the 19th century. If you were born in the palace in the 19th century, the monks who taught at the palace were actually teaching that the path to nirvana was closed, the path to jhana was closed, that monks should be doing social services. And you're getting wrong view, even though you're in the palace. If you were born out in a little tiny shack out in the northeast, you might have met Ven.Ajahn Mun or any of the Ven.Ajahns, and they would have taught you the true Dhamma. And that's where people were actually practicing. There's a series of films called The Ice Age. Do you remember those? I happened to see them one time. I was flying from Bangkok to Los Angeles, and the kid in the seat in front of me had the whole set. And it was right between the seats. I could see the movie. And I must admit, I preferred Ice Age 1. That was a cooler story. But Ice Age 2 had this great scene where the animals involved, male and female animals, are adrift on a raft in this ocean. And it's dark and it's foggy, and they have no idea where they are. And all of a sudden these lights appear in the distance. So they go toward the light. And it's a group of mermaids and mermen lounging on rocks, looking really attractive. And the animals go, wow, like this. And then you begin to notice, as you look at the mermaids and the mermen, that they're static in the image. And you look into the static, and they're fangs. So they realize, oops, piranhas, I gotta get out of here. So some of these images that will appear to you are not going to be that reliable. So you have to ask yourself, okay, where can I go that I can practice and keep that determination in mind? So there was one point where you had to choose where you're going to go, and you chose this.
Just a follow-on question from that, Ajahn. There's a view that I hear often about the fact that we choose to be born, and that there's a plan for our life. And this is not a Buddhist view, but it's a view I hear commonly. To what degree is that true? And to what degree do we understand the consequences of those choices?
It's really hard to say. I think there's a belief in the Tibetan tradition and a belief in the Chinese tradition that there's certain stages that you have to go through before you get reborn. In Theravada, we don't have that. My teacher had a number of students who were psychic, and they could see that some people, when they died, just immediately went someplace. Other people hung around for a while before they would go. And I can imagine, if you have the luxury of choice, you've got a lot of good karma. Now, the other people who don't have that good karma, they don't have the luxury of choice. They just get dragged away.
So So if someone's going through a bad experience, like I've heard this, and they get told, you chose this because you needed to learn something. I can see that as a useful perspective because you don't get down because of the bad experience. But is there truth to that?
That I can't tell you. But I can imagine that, there was an old monk at Wat Samphanthawong. They have a rotating roster of monks who give Dhamma talks. This older monk ordained late in life. He had a huge collection of books about near-death experiences. And he loved to read those when it was his turn to give a Dhamma talk. And there were cases where people were actually escorted to the, it's like a kind of police station where they checked, say, oh, your time to die hasn't come yet. And they'd be asked, in some cases, would you like to see a little bit of heaven or hell before you go? Go back to the human realm. And they would. And so sometimes there are actually, they talk in the canon about Yama's minions coming in and getting you. So some people have the luxury of being, going business class, going first class. Other people are put down with the luggage, where they don't have any choice. And I can imagine there will be some cases that say, okay, you choose this, and this will be the consequences. Like, is that the choice you want? Other people don't have that choice. My favorite of his stories they would read was this one guy who goes and they say, well, the time for you to die hasn't come yet, it's time for you to go back, but would you like to see a little bit of heaven? Sure, I'd like to see heaven. So they go up, and heaven is full of all these Thai-style devas. And so he asked the guide, is this only for Buddhists up in heaven? He said, no, we have Christians and Muslims and Hindus and other good people. And he said, don't they get disturbed by seeing that all the devas look like Thai devas? And the guy said, we look the way you expect us to look.
Is there an implication there that, so the devas don't consciously take on that form, but you kind of...
That's how you see them, that's how you interpret them, yeah. Although there was one case, and Ajahn Fuang had this one woman who was very psychic as a student. And this was, my mother died before I was ordained. And this woman came in to visit the monastery one time, and at one point she just pulled out her pocketbook and wanted to give me some money. And Ajahn Fuang said, monks can't accept money, why are you doing this? And she said, I know, I just felt inspired to do that. He said, is that because you saw his mother? And she said, no, I didn't. He said, okay, check her out. So he says, meditating, oh yeah, his mother's here. But she doesn't look like any deva I saw before. She's wearing white and she's got this light behind her head. And Ajahn Fuang said, that's what Western devas look like. So you never know. I was telling stories about Ajahn King this morning. I should tell you that when he came to Wat Dhamma, I've never seen anybody as determined as he was. He was very determined right from the very beginning, because he had this illness that the doctors had told him he had only 2 years to live. And that's how he got into meditation. And so people saw his physical weakness and they were saying, he's not going to last as a monk. I saw his mental strength. I said, okay, whether he lasts physically or not, it's not the issue, but he seems strong in his determination. And he's been able to maintain that all along.
How did that determination express itself?
We just kept at it, kept at it, kept at it.
Would that be like, long meditation sessions, or just, because I have an issue where sometimes I think, I could, for example, try like an all-night meditation session, but that takes a physical toll on the body, and so I think wouldn't be better to break it up and then a few sessions.
Well, he would have to stop his meditations because of his physical problems.
Right.
But then he'd come back, and come back, and come back.
So you can take breaks, but just
Right.
persist bringing it back to the practice.
Right.
For someone who lacks persistence at times, and how do you develop that skill?
You have to learn how to talk to yourself and say, look, if I don't make the best use of my time, it's just going to go away, and I can't get it back. There's a story in the canon of a man who passed away. And the Buddha said, if he'd gone forth early in his life, he would have become an arahant. If he'd gone forth as he got older, he would have become a non-returner. If he'd gone forth as he got older than that, he would have become a stream enter, but he never went forth. So sometimes we have the possibilities, but we waste them. I've read a couple places that we actually go through space and time at the speed of light. So that the moment I just said that just now, that's gone. At the speed of light. Whoops. That one slipped away before I could get some good use out of it. So value your time.
Ven.Ajahn, at lunchtime you're talking about skillful use of the self on the path, and you're talking about viewing the self as a competent person who has responsibility and the capability of pursuing the path. When there's times where there's just there's a giving up, there's an allure of just not wanting to do anything. Why does that happen?
Sometimes you put out the energy and you just seem to be getting any results, and you get discouraged. And my thinking in cases like that is, I'll give you an example. The work that I do with books, there's planning a book, coming up with the ideas, creating an outline, actually doing the writing, doing the editing, designing the cover. And each of those requires a different part of my brain. So sometimes if I've been writing something and in my brain it's just getting, coming to a dead end, I say, well, design a cover. Do something else, but also something that's good. And realize, okay, this may seem to be a dead end right now, but there must be other areas. The Buddha compares the practice to like growing a tree. And the tree has many branches. And so sometimes this branch is going as far as it can go, okay, find another branch and work on that one. And I found that sometimes the mind gets tired of watching the breath and say, okay, well, do metta and do some other meditation topic. Or clean up your room. Something simple. I was teaching a course one time at a Buddhist study center in America. I was teaching it on the forest tradition. And after I gave the introduction, I said, no, I want everybody to go back and put up your room in good order. That's the first part of being a forest monk. So if your meditation isn't going very well, wash the dishes, scrub things down. Something that's good.
And then bring that brightness or that space back.
Right, it's back into meditation, yeah. It's also helpful to read the Thera Gata and Theri Gatas, those verses of the elder monks and nuns. Because you realize some of them got suicidal. And yet they were able to pull themselves out. You say, well, at least I'm not suicidal. And if I am, well, somebody else was able to pull themselves out and become awakened, so there's still hope for me.
Ajahn, I have a question about breath meditation, and there's following Ajahn B's method where you observe the whole body breathing. So there's certain times when the boundaries between the physical and the mind, so the boundaries of the body disappear, and I find sometimes it's possible, it becomes quite cool, quite refreshing, and I call it my party trick. I shouldn't call it a party trick, but it's like if I turn my mind towards the coolness, it's like the boundaries of the body even disappears further, and I can sit in this for long periods of time, and there is knowing of sound, there's knowing of what's arising, and applying the principles of where is there suffering, where is there stress, letting go of that. So at that subtle point in the observation of the mind, even the wanting to think is stressful, so that the mind lets that go. But then it comes to a point where, and I think I heard it in one of your talks where you said the mind is radiant and that's how it's able to train itself. But that radiance itself is a defilement. One of the primary defilements, correct me if I've misheard you, misunderstood you. And so that sort of thought came out of meditation as I was reflecting on the talk. Do you have any advice on, at this point in the practice?
Don't get rid of the radiance yet. What you can do with when the boundary in the body starts disappearing is ask yourself, well, what's left that tells me that there's a body sitting here? And there'll be kind of this a cloud of little sensation dots. And so you just stay with the cloud for a while. Let it be amorphous without having any clear boundaries. Then ask yourself, well, what about the space between the dots? Focus there. And you realize that space permeates everything. And just stay with that perception of space until it gets really solid. And then from there you can go to the perception, well, what is it that knows the space? And you come back to just this knowing quality of the mind. And stay there for a while until you get really solid there. And then when you've done that, okay, come back and I'll tell you what to do next.
There's been some meditations where I stay with the knowing, and it's almost as if it's like, I don't think I've fallen off to sleep. It's like 3 hours compressed into one, if that makes sense. Like I know there's knowing and there is awareness in that 3 hours, for example. So at this point you're sitting quite long already.
Yeah.
There's no body and there's no pain. And it's like compressed into 1 hour. And it's weird, it's strange.
Well, your mind is doing fewer things.
Yeah.
Which is why the time passes.
On the topic of testing it, how do you test it? How do you test if it's not moha samadhi or...
Moha samadhi it's pleasant, but you don't know where you are.
Oh, right.
If you're really clear about what your perception is, then you're okay.
And then how does one apply the fourth tetrad of anapanasati?
Well, in the beginning, you're applying that to things that will pull you away. To see that they are in constant stress on that self, and so then you see that to the point where you can develop dispassion for them, and then they'll stop. And then finally, you turn around and you apply it to the meditation. Well, this too is fabricated, which is the drawback. And you ask yourself, if I stay here, it's going to be fabricated. If I go someplace else, it's going to be fabricated. What do I do? And if your mind is ready for that, that question can open things up. Is that it for the night?
Can I ask one more question?
Sure.
I met somebody a while back, and I was speaking to someone who's slightly, just maybe intuitive or low-key psychic about this person. And they said, oh, don't associate with them because there's a lot of, bad energy or bad spirits around this person. And they went on to describe this person's behavior in terms of what that energetic influence would do to the person. And the behavior was pretty spot on in terms of the description I got. So I have some confidence that at least part of what this person is true. In that scenario, I still chose to associate with the person because I thought there might be some benefit for them. But how do you handle the situation?
You go into it, one, you fill your body with your good energy, so their energy doesn't penetrate you. And you have lots of goodwill. And that way you're broadcasting good energy, so that the bad energy can't come in.
And that's enough to be able to allow you to interact safely with them.
Unless you have bad karma with the person. But I mean, that's the general protection. When you're in the presence of a spirit, when you're in the presence of some just energy that feels really unhealthy, you generate as much good energy inside you as you can. Because we live in this world, there are going to be good energies and bad energies. You can't avoid the bad energies all the time. But you can, again, the other day I was listening to a Dharma talk on YouTube. Before I came to Australia, I decided to prepare myself to say, okay, what kind of Dharma is being taught in Australia? And I heard this one Dharma talk by a monk who's in Australia, and he was saying that, when your mind is in a good situation, practice acceptance, practice loving kindness, all these good energy, all these good things. But if you find yourself in a situation where your anger has taken over, you've just got to let the anger run its course. Worst advice I ever heard. There's so many ways you can take your anger apart. So you don't just accept the fact that I'm in a bad situation, I just got to accept the bad. That's what can I do to generate something good inside me so that I can counteract that bad state of mind or whatever. I mean, otherwise, why would the Buddha have taught the Four Noble Truths? I mean, there's a course of action which is going to lead to suffering, and another course of action that's not. It's basically, if you have any sense at all, you choose the second one. And then he lays it out. This is how you act in skillful ways. Like if you have a negative emotion. Okay, he talks about the three kinds of fabrication. There's bodily fabrication, which is the breath. Verbal fabrication, which is how you talk to yourself. Mental fabrication, which is the perceptions you hold in mind and the feelings you focus on. Every emotion is made out of these three things. And if you're in a bad emotion, remind yourself that my mind has many different selves in there. I don't have to identify with this particular self. I've got others. I've got a whole stable. Why don't I take advantage of the good ones? And the good ones will look at the other one and say, okay, look, change the way you breathe. Change the way you talk to yourself. Change your perceptions. You're dealing with your boss. The boss is yelling at you. Okay, the first thing is say, okay, how am I breathing right now? I don't have to let the way the boss is talking to me affect my breathing. And secondly, what am I telling myself about the boss and the situation? Can I think of other things that are equally true but are not going to make me suffer and not going to make me get angry? And then third, okay, what are the perceptions I'm holding in mind? What is my image of the boss? Now if I'm seeing the boss as all-powerful, okay, that's going to be overwhelming. Let's make the boss as small as possible. And this, the Buddha gives this advice. He says, try to think of your goodwill as being as large as the earth. And someone may come along with a bucket and a wheelbarrow and a shovel and say, be without earth, be without earth. And they dig here and dig there and spit here and spit there and urinate here and urinate there. But you're so much bigger. It's not going to have any effect. So think of your goodwill as being large and the boss as being small. Then that changes the emotion. So take advantage of these analyses, these ways of analyzing things.
Does goodwill have a target? Or does it need to have a target all the time?
It's got to be directed at somebody. And you can direct it at everybody. I mean, the Buddha's image of the ideal practice is someone who blows a conch horn, which sends its sound in all directions. Now, if someone is being particularly nasty, okay, you direct it first at them. You know the story, his image of the bandits cutting you up into little pieces with a two-handled saw. Okay, you direct goodwill first to them and then to the whole universe. You can tell yourself, at least my boss is not cutting me up with a two-handled saw. Any question?
Yeah, this question came up today in discussion. It was around having a teacher and also being how to be a student or how to have that relationship with the teacher.
Okay, basically, if you have a question for the teacher, you ask the question, and then you take the answer and say, okay, I'll give it a try. And if it doesn't work out, try to figure out why is it not working out. And then you go take that to the teacher, saying, what you told me is not working. But this is what I figured out. Is this the right way of thinking about it? And that way you give the teacher the benefit of the doubt to begin with. But also you don't lay all the responsibility on the teacher. You say, I'm playing a role in my education here too. That's how you train yourself to be a good student. I was telling someone else the story about Ajahn Fuang with Ajahn Lee. When they built, did I tell you this morning about the ordination hall, Wat Samphanthawong?
The East and West?
East and West, yeah. And in that case, Ajahn Fuang had said, this is not going to work. But he went ahead and tried it anyhow, and sure enough, it didn't work. But then he came up with another solution. Proposed that to Ajahn Lee. In that case, Ajahn Lee said, yeah, that's the relationship. Okay? Okay.
Ajahn, can we offer this to the pen?